that a character from one of the anime movies?
Mortal Kombat.
Yeah. So, now that I've spoken too much, let me say this. We're going to have a 30-minute discussion from these two wonderful gentlemen. Jack Wann, I've introduced to you. Marty Rosen's over here. He was the star of Jubilee Barn Bands. Gentlemen, give us the Greek Playwrights.
Well, being the showman that he is, the Florence Ziegfeld of Kentucky, Reggie put the uninteresting part first, but we're going to try our best to make what could be fairly uninteresting, interesting. We did Shakespeare, we did Christmas musicals, we've done that kind of thing. So at least you have the advantage, quoting your Shakespeare, that if you don't like what we do tonight, you can say it was all Greek to me, and you can go. Okay, so what I'm trying to do tonight with Marty's help will be to say how and why the Greeks are important to us now. What did they do that is so important to theater today? Well, you're going to find out almost everything that we do. I mean, let's begin with the how. They told us where the audience ought to be. They told us that there needed to be aisles, bombs, sometimes they were called, going out into the audience, where entrances and exits and levels were. They taught us how to divide the play into acts. They taught us how we could move from one section of the play to the other. They had all kinds of stage machinery. They used props. They used costumes. They wore masks. They all of these things were gifts to us from the Greeks. And of course, then the Romans immediately stole it from the Greeks, as was their technique, which was very smart of them. And they, in turn, then led it on down through the Western world to our English cousins and the kind of theater that we know in English. So it was a pretty clear-cut series. But let's talk a little bit about some of these things. First of all, the way it started was the way it started in almost any country, with a kind of a cult leader, a shaman, a storyteller, a tale teller, who would come out and tell people stories about the war they were involved in or the history of or whatever. But it was almost a religious ritual. And that storyteller would come out and would explain, just by himself or herself, what was going on. So that to begin with, I might say something like, in this story that I'm telling you, there is this horrible man who is about to do something terrible to this lovely young lady. And he is saying to her, "You're mine, you're mine." And she is saying to him, "You're no. But one of the Greeks got this clever idea. You're early.
Okay.
and got this clever idea. Well, wait a minute. Why do I have to do all the work? Why don't I just come out there and say, "You're mine, you're mine." No. And so now we've got dialogue. We never had that before. It was always just one chorus person telling people things, and then someone got this great idea. Let someone else say something, and you can actually exchange words with one another. Then beyond that, a third playwright, who we'll talk about here in a minute, thought, well, two's probably not enough, so I can say, "You're mine, you're mine." You can say, "No." And then you can say,
Yes.
"Say your line."
Yes, whatever it is that I am to say, I now say for the benefit of
Marty's
you and the
his
audience.
line was, "I'll save you."
I will save you not. That's
So,
Shakespeare. That's
and now we
Shakespeare.
have a play kind of like we know it, with dialogue, with characters talking with it. Now, as recently as just the last century, Peter Brook wrote a wonderful book, maybe one of the best books ever written about theater, called The Empty Space. And in The Empty Space, he makes a strong commitment to the idea that he can take any empty space, let a man or a woman walk across that space with someone observing them doing that, and you have an act of theater. That theater goes on in an empty space when someone does something and someone watches it. And I think that is very, very true. All right, I said we're going to talk about how. Those are some of the hows of the things that they taught us how to do. But they also gave us some very good ideas on why to do it. And I fight for this tooth and nail, right, and I will right till my dying day. And that is that I don't want the theater that I do to be only something to divert you and to entertain you. I want it to entertain you. I want it to divert you, and God only knows in the world we live in, we need to be diverted and we need to be entertained. But we can also do things that are just as important as what the religious leaders do, what the politicians do, what the educators do, what the people in the world of commerce do. And the Greeks were the first to recognize that. And when they were asked to say, what is the theater supposed to do? Why do you do theater? They said, to make better citizens. And to this day, that's what I think we ought to be doing. Our job as theater practitioners is to make better citizens. Make them know more, think about things in a new way, whatever, but to make better citizens. And so we go all the way back to Greece, and there's not a better definition. Now, these Greek plays have gone on and on and on in their original form, but let's just look around about just how frequently we rely on those plays. We know we do this with Shakespeare, of course. I mean, everything's Shakespeare, West Side Story, and it's Shakespeare, whatever. But I'm going to take just one Greek story, one Greek play. Let's take the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. As recently as this past year, in Louisville, the Broadway series, Hadestown. What is Hadestown? Orpheus and Eurydice. It's that play. On Broadway, a revival, Moulin Rouge, Baz Luhrmann's Moulin Rouge, and a movie version also done by Baz Luhrmann. What is Moulin Rouge? Orpheus and Eurydice. A few years ago, a gentleman we all know well by the name of Tennessee Williams wrote a play called Orpheus Descending. Orpheus and Eurydice. One of the best of our new female playwrights, Sarah Ruhl, wrote a play just recently called, of all things, Eurydice, and tells it from the viewpoint of Eurydice. The point is that these things not only were done and we study about them and look at them, but they are still being done. They are feeding into everything we do. So not only the how we do it, putting an audience out there, the whole idea, for example, of the rake, of you guys being in an audience where the floor is raked so you can see better, that all was in the Greek theater. That came from them. And sometimes we do the reverse, and we rake platforms on the stage in order to get you in a better position. But all of those masks, costumes, the silliness that we did a while ago, if Reggie'd gotten his line right, but I'm giving him a hard time. I have to do that. That's my job. But really, the whole notion of why does just one priest or storyteller have to tell the story? Now, this sat very well, and they loved it, and boy, the actors were highly respected, but not always. Sometimes they got bent out of shape about it because they were concerned philosophically with would they offend the gods? Because when you act, you are lying. You are not telling the truth. You are pretending. And do we have a right as human beings to pretend something? Is that not offensive to the gods? So there was debate even then about how to do it. But we have learned that, and I often like to quote Atticus Finch, from To Kill a Mockingbird. The best way we have to learn about ourselves is to walk around in someone else's shoes. And that's where I would take exception to those Greeks who said, we're lying, but we're lying for such a good reason that it allows us to know ourselves better. So that would be where I would go. Now, this gentleman did something that certainly I have not done. I couldn't believe it when he told me he did this. But a couple of summers ago, he said, you know, I'm going to set myself a summer project and I'm going to read all of the Greek plays. And Marty Rosen sat down and read every one of them. Marty, tell us about that experience and what you gained from having done that. By the way, there are hundreds of them, but not that many that are still around. So it's not like it was a big task, but not overwhelming.
Yeah, I think what happened was I was reading and I just came across and mentioned there are only 33 extant Greek tragedies where we have the entire text. There are fragments of others, but there are only 33, and they're not. They tend not to be long. If you've ever seen one, they tend to run, 1,200 lines. It's not. They're not gigantic projects. I think the issue we're going to face today is that what we have of these, all of these plays that we have were parts of tetralogies. You're going to probably talk about this. I don't want to take away from them. They were on a given day. They would perform 4 plays in a sequence by the same playwright, dealing with related topics. So that would have been an entire all-day affair where the audience was getting exposed to a range of attitudes toward different things. What we have is 33 plays, and I think we only have 1 tetralogy. So all of them are fragments of an all-day entertainment.
And they're all tragedy.
Well, the ones we're talking about, what I'm talking about are tragedies. I've not read all the comedies, but I think Jack is going to talk about Roman comedy, Greek comedy as well, which is also an important genre. So the thing that I don't want to talk too much about this, but there are a couple of things that I want to talk about. First of all, the first extant play is by Aeschylus. It's called The Persians. And when I read it, I was astonished. So you probably are aware that the Greeks had fought a number of long wars with the Persians. This goes back, the Greeks at this period of time we're talking about had been in constant warfare for a century. And the first phase of that was a couple of major wars against the Persians. And Aeschylus had fought in one of those wars. He fought it in one of the major battles. His brother died in one of those battles. And the first extant Greek tragedy we have is set in Persia. And what's happening is the Persians are sitting around, the Persian leaders are sitting around talking about the fact that their army has been going for a really long time. They sent their army to Athens or to Greece to fight the Greeks and the Spartans. And they haven't heard any news and they're worried about it. Then the wife, the mother actually, Darius's wife, Xerxes' mother, comes into where the elders are and she says that she has just visited the grave of her husband and she had a bad vision, something bad was said to her, something threatening was revealed to her. And the elders are very worried about what this means. They're worried that it means that something as bad has happened to their army and their navy. And soon we get a messenger who comes in and tells them that the Persian fleet has been destroyed, the army has been destroyed. And then the tragedy of this play is focused on the Persians. Now this is Aeschylus, who's a citizen of a nation that has been, or a city-state, that has been fighting with the Persians forever. And the first tragedy we have is this tragic depiction of what's going on with the Persians when they discover that they have lost their army, that they've lost their battle. It's always struck me as odd. I don't know what you think about this, but there's not a case like that in American theater, for example, or American film. It would be like somebody writing a film in 1946 that is sympathetic to the Germans having lost World War II. It's just an astonishing kind of thing to me that they do that. Now, of course, what they're really dealing with is they're telling that story, but as I think Jack is getting at here, they are telling Athenians about this as well. Athenians are learning what it's like to lose because they're having all kinds of problems. This century is a terribly violent century, and the Athenians do lose a lot of wars. In fact, they lose at the end of that. So I think that particular play really struck me. When I finished the project, I'll say this: when I finished it, for a while, I was actually kind of in a state of anxiety. The moral world that the Greeks are writing about at that time seemed to be so far removed from our contemporary way of thinking about the world, thinking about morality, about thinking about faith, about thinking of responsibility, that it was sort of terrifying in a way. But that's been a number of years now, and in the years since then, of course I wasn't doing theater then. I reviewed theater, but I wasn't doing any theater. And in the years since, I've gone back and looked at those plays, and I've come to realize how important they are in actually, as you said, teaching us about the world in a way that we're not going to. We see these things happen. Tragedy happens. What we all learn from that is not just that it's a tragedy, but there is another way to do things.
And as good citizens to do something about it.
That's right. Yeah. So anyway, that's a short summary of that particular project.
But I thought that was an amazing endeavor. Now, I hadn't mentioned operas. Almost every single play has an opera version. Those of you who are opera buffs probably know a lot of them. Just last week, Marty and a couple of friends and I went to see Superman. Where would Marvel and DC comic books be without the Greeks? All those various superheroes and supervillains and so on, so many of them are directly based on Greek characters, straight out of these plays. Probably what will be the biggest movie of an upcoming year is a new version of the Odyssey, which I think Matt Damon is in again and so on like that. But I'm told that it is going to be a magnificent labor of love that we should all probably watch for. But let me just go through a couple of other ways that it has influenced the modern world. Are you familiar with the series of books and plays called The Lightning Thief? All Greek antagonists in that, right? Throughout all of them. One of my favorites, there is a play based on Medea called Medea, Mydeauh, Dea, Medea. And it's about a dumb dope of a football player and his wife and so on like that, and her getting revenge on them. But Medea is one of my favorites. There's one called Greeks, and that retells the Oedipus story, but it's under the Margaret Thatcher administration in England. I still think I think I like all of the plays, Greek plays, in their original form best except one. I like Jean-Henri's version of Antigone better than I like the original. I think he captured something in it but I don't know how many of you have seen Antigone, the more modern version, and so on, but it's quite wonderful. Then, of course, you've got to have your ethnic versions. There is a play called, I didn't mention it a while ago, saving it for now, called Black Orpheus. Black Orpheus, during all those years of black exploitation films, out comes this art film called Black Orpheus. It's brilliant. It's absolutely a brilliant film. You really should see it. It all takes place at Carnival in Rio. And the whole story of going to Hades and Helen bring her back, all of it is kept intact, in the whole thing. But again, I think I've already mentioned 10 stage devices ranging from bombs to props to costumes to masks to first actor, second actor, third actor, all of that stuff. How could we do theater without that? I mean, it's a direct gift to us as to how we do theater in the Western world. It isn't as true in the Eastern world. That's why some of the plays like the No plays and the Kabuki plays and so on are a little difficult for us because we don't have that tradition to go by, although we try to learn from it. And that would make a good talk someday to talk about. But at any rate, I did want to mention that. Now, as actors, we lie, right? We're telling lies. And we are playing with our imaginary friends. We get paid to play with our imaginary friends. It's a pretty amazing thing. But again, if you're willing to go along with me and with Atticus Finch, and Will Rogers also used to like to say the same thing, you have to stand behind a man and look at things from his direction before you really understand what's going on. You've got to know, somehow inhabit another persona before you can really know your own persona the way you want to, seems to me. And I think that's one of the great gifts that theater brings to any society, whether it's a small community in Kentucky or New York City or London or wherever it may be. So then we've given you a number of devices that they've given us. Of course, the whole philosophical system of how we do theater is the gift of a Greek man by the name of Aristotle. And that whole series of things, plot, diction, thought, music, spectacle, all of those things come straight from the Greeks. And we still, when I write plays right now, I go right through there and point by point, I have to check myself and say, is the theme rising to the top? Because spectacle was at the bottom. It's nice to have fancy scenery and so on, but along with Peter Brook a while ago, I can take that man, let him walk across an empty space, and I can make theater. So I don't have to have the scenery. I don't have to have the music. And by the way, music for them, that word music meant something a little different. It doesn't mean, it's muse, the muses, music. It means, probably a better word for us would be harmony. Like we speak of the harmony of the spheres and so on, things that fit properly. The words sound right coming out of the mouth of that character or whatever. But at any rate, it was old Aristotle that gave us the form. So we have all these techniques, forms, we have all these plays that we're doing now that are all based on the, I'll call it the old Greek. And the purpose for doing it was to make better citizens. And the way you did that was what they called catharsis. Catharsis means cleansing. The idea is to get a group of people together and somehow with what you do, erase the board in such a way that you can make them look at something differently or in a new way or in a way they hadn't thought about it before or in a different way or whatever. And catharsis was the goal of making a better citizen. Does that make a kind of sense? Yeah, and it seems to me that that's the right reason for doing theater, to make the people around you a little bit better, and not from a superior attitude. It's going to do the same thing for you. I'm 120 years old, and I guarantee you that I learn and grow just as much with every night of every rehearsal of every play I ever do than I did from the time I did my very first one. You could, if you stop growing, hang it up. You might as well be put away. It was a communal experience, cultural, political, all of those things. Harold Bloom, in talking about Shakespeare, talks about Shakespeare's ability to help us understand what it is to be human. Well, the Greeks started that, I think, a long time ago. That's what they were trying to figure out. What do human beings do when confronted with issues that are difficult to deal with? How do we deal with it? We may watch that play and say, I would never do it that way. Or I'm glad I saw that, I'll do that. But I would never do that way is just as important a lesson as I'll do it that way. Because you know what not to do, and you can check one off the list and put that one aside, and so on. The narrative format, the chorus, the one stepping out and saying, I'm yours, you're mine, you're mine. Then someone's deciding to let the second one come out and say, no, 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 you're mine, no, no, no. And then someone's saying, I'll save the day, and Mighty Mouse comes in and saves the day. A lot of the stock characters we have today are straight from the Greek drama. For example, you go see a funny thing happen on the way to the forum, and you see the wonderful soldier, the braggart warrior, Miles Gloriosus. Well, there's a whole play called Miles Gloriosus, a Greek play. It's straight out of the Greek drama. big houses, sometimes those, I don't, how many of you have been to Greece and seen those theaters? Well, there's one of them at least that seated 15,000. I mean, I do have to tell you an amusing little story about how people screw things up. But they thought that the masks were worn because they had sort of like megaphone type deals in them, and it allowed them to amplify their voices more. So that's part of the reason for the mask, plus the scene changing aspect of it. But for many, many years, they all thought that the Greek actors wore these what looked like high-heeled shoes, these shoes with these enormous heels on them, and so on, to make them taller and bigger and noticed more. Until someone got to digging around in the ruins over there, and they found this series of holes around the front, and then they found these statues where they had gotten the idea that they wore these heels, and then they took the heels and they put them in the hole, and they realized it was just a way to hold the statues up. There's no real assurance that they did that at all, but that's how history can throw you off sometimes. And so they had wonderful wheeled wagons. Boy, when Medea, if we do the one I like, but Medea goes off in that chariot up to the heavens, apparently from what I've read about it, and I'm sure Marty can verify this, is they had some pretty spectacular effects. I mean, they had flames and fire and trap doors and all of that. So we have a form. All right, who were the writers? We need to blast off now. We're about out of time. But there were four that were the biggies. Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides were the three big ones in tragedy. They did the bulk of what we know as what we look to. Aristophanes did the bulk of what we know of comedy. Then Terence and people like that in the Roman world took over on that. But Aristophanes was the main comic writer. Euripides was probably the one you'll like the best because he's the most modern. He's very psychological. He's where the other two are a little bit more what we would call traditional. Aristophanes was a soldier. In fact, I think 3 of the 4 had taken part in the Persian Wars and so on, and were soldiers. Of course, there's the old joke about going to the tailor shop with your toga and saying, "Oh, Euripides? Oh no, Eumenides?" Boo. They usually did the tetralogy, 3 plays and a satyr play. Aeschylus was by far the most popular. He was the hot shot.
What's a
He
satyr?
ran all day.
What's a satyr play?
A satyr play was a dirty, little naughty something with music and anything you could get away with to kind of make people get out of the world of the play they'd just gotten into. They did it right up through Shakespeare's days when they would come out and do a little jig or a dance or something after the play and so on. That continued right up until, I'd say 200 years ago.
Is it like us playing music after you all give us the lecture?
Yeah,
Absolutely. Satyr music.
There is one satyr play extant. It's Cyclops by Euripides. I think it's the only one that exists. So it's the Polyphemus story. It's different than the story of the Odyssey that we get about Polyphemus.
It's kind of interesting. It seems new to us, but the Greek heroes were often flawed. We think of that as a new concept, that the hero's the hero and the villain's the villain. But there were often flawed heroes, and many of the main characters in the Greek plays very diverse, much like Hamlet in many ways. There was a mix of spoken and sung dialogue, so in a way, some of the plays could be considered a version of almost a musical in some ways. I think these things I'm going to have to say